welcome everyone. Welcome to everyone who's joining us. We are starting fairly promptly today, so it may well be that we have people who join us again over the next few minutes, but because there's quite a packed agenda today, we thought we would get started. It's brilliant to have everyone here today to be talking about how people can be your secret weapon in thriving beyond the crisis. This is the 5th webinar in the series, which focuses on how COVID-19 is disrupting marketing and sales. And today we're obviously going to be focusing very much specifically on an area which can be a real differentiator for a lot of organisations. What's the quality of your people? What kind of customer service can they offer? And increasingly, and in a big trend I'm seeing, what are their opinions? What are their ideas? There are a lot of organisations out there who are really trying to position their people as thought leaders. So I'm sure that's an area which is going to come up quite a lot today. Just a couple of things on webinar protocol before we talk a little bit more about what we're covering in the session itself. I think it always works really well if you can to have your camera on during these sessions, just because it's nice to get people to know you, to see your face. Obviously, if you've got a really bad broadband connection, or indeed if your webcam's not working, then that might not be a possibility. But if you can, please do have your camera on. What we also ask as well is that because various people will be talking during the webinar, not least the speakers, and also I'm sure that lots of the delegates will be quite chatty too, please can you put your microphone on mute if you are not speaking. And then finally, we really do encourage you to share your thoughts and ideas in the chat function. So there's a chat box at the bottom of the screen. Please do make use of that if you've got any thoughts or contributions. And we also very much encourage you to put your hand up as well if you have got some ideas too. So we hope that gives you the tools you need to contribute to the discussion. If you're feeling very technologically minded, there's also a reactions button at the bottom of the screen. So if someone makes a comment that you particularly want to support, I think there's an applause emoji, and you can also put your hand up using that functionality as well. So we've talked about what the webinar series is, what we're going to be covering today, some of the things that make a good webinar as well. We've got a bit of an icebreaker now to get the discussion going. Normally at this point we do a bit of a quiz, but given that this is the 5th webinar in the series, and obviously lockdown has been going on for a while, I thought it might be quite interesting just to find out from you, the delegates, and also the speakers as well, and I will also contribute to this exercise too, perhaps one really big burning issue that has come up around people over the last couple of months for you. So it might be something like, I've got a brilliant colleague and I want to get them profiled in the press, or it might be something like, one of my colleagues is really keen to join Twitter and how do I support them in doing that? Or it might be something like, we need to improve our customer service and we want to think through a bit about how to do that. So what I'd like everyone to do is to go to the chat function at the bottom of the screen. And what I'd like you to do is just to take a minute just to put your big burning question about people in there, which we will use as the basis for the discussion later. And when I say so, everyone has to hit return. So basically, you're just putting your big burning question in the chat box. And then when I give you the signal, we will all hit return. And then we can all see what everyone else is thinking. So I'm going to give you a minute just to pop your question down. Don't worry about it being perfect. And then when I give you the signal, we will all post them. Okay, so on the count of 3, I'd like everyone to post their big burning question. So all you need to do that is to hit return. So 1, 2, 3. Ooh, lots of really good ideas here. Very good. Stephanie, you've raised a fantastic point here, actually. Do you want to just say a bit more about it?
Hello.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hiya. Yeah, so funny enough, I work for an apprenticeship company and myself, and I'm doing marketing executive level 4 through JGA. It's just because for us, we're trying to build up our brand a bit more and get some more people on board, etc. So it's just, what ways are good to make your current, customers, if you like, absolutely rave about your brand enough to make others want to come on board, really.
Brilliant. I think that's a really good point to really draw out those differentiators and to make it part of what makes people to come to you. So Stephanie, hold that thought. Brilliant question. We're going to explore it later when we get into the discussion. And Stanley, you've got a really interesting question here, which I think must have come from the interview which Sadiq Khan did for the Times yesterday, which I thought was a great interview. Do you want to say a bit more about that? Because this is a really interesting point.
Yes, there's a lot of shame around loneliness and isolation even before COVID, and yet it's something that most of us acknowledge. So, whilst we're trying to be ambitious and strive to make the best of opportunities, how can we balance that with the need to recognise that quite often people are having very bad days and essential crisis management is taking precedence over a strategic long-term position. So I'm just looking to open up that in response to what I thought was a really great piece of selective vulnerability by the Mayor Sadiq.
It was a really interesting interview, wasn't it? I mean, speaking of how you can really show people at their best, actually, what I thought was very skillfully handled as part of that interview is he was talking about the incredible amount of work he and his team have done over the last couple of months and the difficult decisions they've had to make, but also where it's been a challenge. And he talked very openly about his mental health and where he had good days and bad days, and like you say, Stanley, I thought that was a fantastic way to show that he's human, like all of us. He's had ups and downs over lockdown, and I thought that was actually in itself really positive PR, and really great for making him seem even more relatable. Excellent, great. Thank you very much, everyone. So lots of great suggestions, lots of great things getting you all thinking about the people side of things there. So please do hold those thoughts and we will look at discussing them more when we get onto the discussion later. Now, those of you who've been to our webinars before will know that we, at this point, move on to a panel discussion where we have some fantastic speakers lined up, where we will be tackling this whole issue in a little bit more depth. And we had a really good discussion as a speaker panel last week, actually, so I'm looking forward to building on all of those thoughts that came out from that discussion. So there's 3 fantastic speakers with us today. So I'm going to introduce them to you, tell you a bit about them, and then we will move on to the discussion itself. So firstly, we're delighted to have Marco Scarola with us. He's a global marketing and communications leader. He's worked across a range of sectors such as education, technology and publishing, both private and not-for-profit, over 20 years. He's a trained journalist. He moved into education in 2007, worked for organisations such as Pearson, and he's held some really interesting interim roles over the last 3 years. So he's worked at BSI as Global Head of Marketing and Brand, the British Council's Global Director of Education and Society, and currently he's working at Central and Cecil Housing Trust as the Head of Marketing and Engagement. Welcome, Marco. We're also delighted to be joined by Ben Schofield. He manages the communications team at Tower Hamlets Homes. He has 20 years experience in comms in the public and charity sectors, mostly working in social housing, and he's collected more than 20 industry awards. Ben, that's fantastic. We're looking forward to hearing more about that later. He mentors young people for the Media Trust and BAME housing staff for the Housing Diversity Network. And in 2000, he helped set up the UK's most successful community radio station, Desi Radio, which promotes Punjabi language and culture and remains one of his directors. And then last but not least, we have the fantastic Richard Goodwin. His career has spanned 20 years in marketing, sales and strategy. Previously, he's worked at British Steel and the Stationery Office. And since 2015, he's been the managing director of the JGA Group, leading it to the West London Business Award for Best Education and Training Provider in 2019. Welcome to the three of you. Very pleased to have you here. Could we kick off with some trends then? So it'd be interesting just to hear your thoughts on how some of those issues that we started to touch on in the discussion, and also some things based on your own experience at work as well over the last 2-3 months. It'd be interesting to hear what your thoughts are on how things have changed, and what you think that might mean for the new normal that we're all gradually edging towards. Marco, could we start with you? I'd love to hear your take on people and how that's changing.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Zoe. Hi, everybody. I think my sort of short answer to the core question of how people can be your secret weapon is that people should always be our secret weapon, really, as marketeers, as salespeople. Everybody around the business is a subject matter expert, and it's our job, of course, to take the best advantage of that expertise. I think what's different in the circumstances, two of the sort of key themes, really, for me. Number one is the emphasis, as we've all seen, on the heart and soul workers of our organisation, whether that's frontline staff, key workers, whatever we call it, depends on our sector, on our industry. But really bringing those workers, those employees, those colleagues to the fore in our marketing, and of course within that having to rely on them a lot more, because we can't be there physically in many instances to capture content, if you like, to capture things that are going on. So we're having to leverage those staff as well as to bring them to the fore. And sort of related to that, of course, is that big play. The big play now is on empathy. We always strive as organisations to show empathy with our customers, or in the case of the organisation I work for, our residents. I work for a small housing trust, London-based housing trust, and we specialise in sort of end-to-end care for over 55s. So we have a number of housing schemes, sheltered accommodation. We have a number of care homes in London, and we have some private sales and rent as well. So a real mixed portfolio. And of course, the emphasis is been on those frontline staff, whether they're housing scheme officers or care staff. So it's been a real challenge. Going from where we were before, the marketing team, the comms team, the engagement team, really, being present in those different environments and developing messages and content and assets that we can share through our different channels. We can't do that anymore, or we're severely hampered. And the need has been to sort of really empower those key workers, those heart and soul workers, frontline staff, empower and encourage them to create those assets for us, to tell our story for us. I'm not sure about other people's experiences here, but certainly for this organisation, which I'm relatively new to as an interim, before COVID, most staff really didn't want to engage, didn't want to generate content. They're doing their job, which is supporting, rightly so, supporting residents, whether that's in care homes or staff. But this really, in a perverse way, I suppose, has been an opportunity to kind of galvanize staff, to kind of really get them to tell our story, show all the great work that they're doing. And I think, you know, I won't go into, and I'm sort of hogging the limelight here, but you know, I think we've had some good success, which I can talk about a bit later.
That's really interesting, Marcus. So I think there's a key point there about staff as content creators and ambassadors, and how that perhaps shifts the parameters a little in terms of their roles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ben, what trends have you noticed? Ben, I think you're on mute.
Me and tech.
Sorry.
I'll echo that point. But previously, you know, if I wanted to make a video, I'd have commissioned a videographer, spent a couple of days planning it in, spent a day filming, and come out with a pristine 2 minutes worth of footage at the end of it. Now it's okay for people to do that on their iPhone and just send it out in minutes. And I think the learning for us in comms is that actually people can be trusted to do that. Previously we'd have been worried, oh God, they'll go off message, and really it doesn't matter if they go slightly off message. It's the emotional impact that counts. The other thing I wanted to say is that as we see with the government, as we see with organisations like me, the situation is changing so rapidly that we're not agile enough to respond to it in many occasions, and this has led, I think, to a sort of golden age for influencers who can respond very, very quickly, more quickly than celebrities with their PR machines, etc., etc. And you know, those people don't appear in my media monitoring. So when I was asked to make a video this Eid stay at home, I asked our staff, who are the influencers? Who are the influencers? And we got a dozen influencers just to cut a quick video of them all saying this Eid stay at home. And I'd never heard of any of them. But people had, because we got like 12 million views. You know, it went global, just a silly little video. So I think I think the industry seriously has got to start looking at influencers. It's not something I've considered before, but our staff know who they are and I don't.
Brilliant. So I think again there's something there about the obviously the staff being the providers of content, but also the providers of insight and those key contacts. You know, where do they go to get information, and who do they see as the influencers as well? So yeah, really interesting point. Thank you, Ben. Richard, what trends have you observed about people over the last few months?
I think without doubt there's increasing amounts of willingness to consider purchasing through automated systems. So whether that's people going to Amazon to buy their groceries, or to Sainsbury's online to buy their groceries where they wouldn't have dreamt of doing so before, or other things where just because of COVID, people have had to change their behavior. And once they've changed their behavior to some degree, why would they go back until the rest of the world adapts and gives them a reason, for example, to go back into shops as opposed to just having to go shopping. So I think that there is a real automation was already fashionable before COVID, but I think the whole question of how do you fit together people versus either artificial intelligence at one extreme or just simply self-service websites for information and purchasing products and services is definitely a question. And then you say, well, okay, what sort of products and services or what sort of roles should people be involved? They have to be more complex. They have to be flexible, where you can sell or make available the correct product or the correct service based on reading between the lines of your customers, based on the subtleties that only people can get from people, because otherwise people can help themselves or it could be automated. And I think also there's a strong issue with if you phone First Direct, for example, for years and years, ever since they set up in the 80s, as their predecessor, whatever, as First Direct, it's been about really quality people on the end of the phone. You phone them up, you never wait more than a few rings, you don't get any menus, and the person on the end of the phone can help you. And that's not like a lot of other organizations where you go through 15 different sets of options and end up in the wrong department, and then they put you across to the right department, and so forth. So in terms of people and COVID, it's about having people you can trust, and people being worthy of trusting. And that also dictates your business strategy, I think, more broadly. Are people important to your business? And that's sort of judgment you're making. And consistency is clearly important. That comes back to Jamie's question in the chat. If people are putting stuff out on social media, how can you be sure it's a consistent experience? I guess the answer is, well, if it was on the telephone, how would you be sure it was a consistent experience? And if the answer is you'd have recorded it while it was on the phone, then the answer is, well, you can see the interaction on social media. And if it's done once, then people will learn from it if it's not right and do it differently the next time. So I think COVID, we've said several times through this series, has accelerated a lot of existing trends, and this whole balance between people and automation. No longer a perception that offices aren't quite as important, a perception that self-service is easier to do, or people are more likely to be able to do it, is the big change for people coming out of this.
Thank you, Richard. That's really interesting, and I think it speaks to a really important question as well, about how, if automation does accelerate, which I really think it will, in complete agreement on that, what that means for how the humans and the machines relate to each other. Someone I know works in financial services, and they've actually had to go on a course not so long ago about how to line manage robots, and actually discovered as part of that the challenge was really about whether the humans might actually end up sabotaging the robots. And you can see how that could be an interesting, quite worrying tension actually, at a time when we're getting to potentially some significant unemployment issues as well. So yeah, lots to think through there around the human versus the automated angle. And of course, you talked about social media there as well, which seems to come up quite a lot as part of these webinars. And I was wondering whether the three of you had noticed any changes about how staff themselves were talking about the organisation on social media over the last couple of months. Marco, any thoughts from you?
Well, I think for us, being a small organisation, as I said, I'm new. Part of my role here is to develop a new website, develop more of a digital strategy, and you know, we're launching a new website in the next 6 weeks or so, and we're behind the curve in terms of using social. We have accounts, we push stuff out, but staff, including the CEO, don't currently use social media. It's part of the plan, if you like, to change that, which, yes, you could argue, well, this would be sort of the perfect opportunity to do that. But to be honest, we've got so many other things to deal with, including, you know, what to Ben's, I think it was Ben's point early on, which is, you know, the core focus for an organisation like us is crisis management, crisis comms management, is making sure we're communicating properly with residents in the right channels, and social media just doesn't happen to be the most important channel for us with our over 55s. But what I have noticed on the positive side is that we use Yammer for staff internally. And as I said before, asking or getting staff traditionally to generate content, whether that's pictures or video, whatever it might be, just didn't really happen. You know, you had the odd outlier who was sort of, you know, quite into it. But with COVID and with, I think for us early on, there was, you know, certainly from the care home point of view, in the media, it was completely ignored for weeks. You know, it was all about the NHS. And then of course, when there was reports on care homes, it was you know, really negative, really, you know, tragic in terms of the examples being cited. So for me, it was a good opportunity early on to sort of G up the care home managers and say, look, you know, it's down to you really to show what's happening, you know, to the next of kin or the relatives and our wider stakeholders. And luckily it caught fire, and we went from nothing to sort of dozens of posts every week, videos and so on. So, you know, our social media internally has grown massively, and to some extent across housing as well. And we've been able to use those assets, of course, albeit with the complication of permissions and so on. We've been able to use some of those assets on our social media and look at creating compilation videos for our future website and that kind of thing. So yeah, we've noticed some trend, as I say, people generating that content, but we're behind the curve in terms of our wider staff being ambassadors compared to other organisations I've worked at.
So some progress there, though. I don't think you should be too hard on yourself. The fact that you've empowered colleagues to start to produce more of their own content and to be a bit of a voice for the organisation. And of course that brings with it its own challenges, doesn't it? And Ben, from what you were saying earlier, it sounded a bit like you had to grapple with some similar issues on that front. What would you advise other organisations who've had to set those parameters?
Yeah, having said we can trust staff to get it right, I'm going to completely contradict myself now. One of the issues I found with staff on social media was relentless selfies of people delivering food, and isn't it great and isn't life jolly, when actually for all of us it wasn't great and it wasn't jolly, and it certainly visually at least. I mean, I know they're encouraging people to stay at home by delivering food and things, but it just looked like all the stuff on our social media were out all the time, contradicting our stay-at-home message. So I'm not sure that we got it right at Tower Hamlets Homes. It's a difficult one to manage. I've forgotten what the question was now. What was the question?
Oh no, it was just about how you set those parameters for staff who want to be on social media, and you talked about how they there was quite a lot of selfies, and you had to provide some guidance on that.
Yeah, well, but I mean, a public sector organisation like mine is full of guidance. So we do have our social media policy that says what isn't and what is allowed. We do that policy also includes, you know, don't get political or party political at least. So it does tend to remove the risks and shoehorn people into talking about their work and what they do rather than anything else.
I think, sorry if I can just add there, I think
Go on.
really good point from Ben, and another reason why I've not been too keen to push sort of wider staff, you know, outside of the organisation, push sharing images of deliveries, or as you say, Ben, or whatever it might be. It is a fine line. You know, we have care homes, and yes, and you know, an outbreak could happen at any time. I think, you know, we just have to. It's a fine line between showing the good stuff that's going on, of which there's plenty, the reality of all the guidelines and the guidance and the advice we have to share and give, and sort of painting a false picture, if you like, of everything's rosy. So I think, yeah, it has to be very considered. You know, I think you've really got to have a well-oiled machine in terms of social. From other companies I've worked at where there've been crises, not this type of crisis, but other crises, it works much better if your social media engine and the you know, the wider staff ambassadors know what they're doing. You know, so when you enter a crisis, they also know what they're doing. They know what that balance is.
Yeah, absolutely. So they need some really key guidance, don't they? Richard, I know we've talked about social media quite a few times. You've got some really interesting opinions on it. Have you noticed any particular trends in how JGA are using social media over the last 2 months?
Not really. I mean, our challenge is that we've changed so fast over the last couple of years that we didn't know who our audience was going to be. And now it's become clear that we have multiple product lines who all have different audiences. And therefore, the use of social media really needs to be quite sophisticated. And it's, as Marco said for him, it's one on a list of things to sort out targeting and essentially manning it, I guess, or wanting it at a reasonable level. We haven't seen a great upsurge in use of social media by staff, or downsurge, if that's a real word. We've kind of glided on through, I think it's fair to say.
Thank you. Yes, I imagine there'll be some organisations where people do become more active and others where it may just stay the same. So it's just interesting to hear about how it may be fluctuating or not at the moment. Okay, great. So some interesting trends there emerging around social media and the shifting role of staff in some organisations. Can we take a moment now to talk about customer service, which is often an area seen as a real differentiator, but also one where I can imagine there'll be many challenges at the moment with things like supply chains being challenged, and also some, all the different things we are and aren't allowed to do right now. So what trends have we noticed in that area at the moment? Ben, could we start with you to think about how you're dealing with some of those queries coming in?
What have we seen? We've seen, initially, like so many other organisations, we reduced everything to an emergency-only service. And one of the messages I don't think that we got across at that time was, actually, it's not the same for us. It's not just normal for us. We're impacted by this as well. We have a third of our staff off. We have staff who are ill, etc., etc. And the expectation amongst the public, in Tower Hamlets at least, was that we should be operating business as normal. When we simply couldn't. That was compounded by something that is probably unique to Tower Hamlets and its social media audiences and its relationship with public sector organisations. Is that 25% of our social media traffic comes from alt-right sources, alt-right websites. So we're up against some pretty offensive cynicism all the time as well. How has it impacted customer service? How else has it impacted customer service? I think that one of the things we've started doing is this kind of conference with our customers. So previously, working for a housing association, we'd have met our residents in some dusty, damp residence hall somewhere and 6 people would turn up. Now we're Zoom conferencing with them for 20, 50 people, and I think that's a game changer for us. Doing all the things that Zoom can bring, like doing polls during the meeting, etc. That has been a game changer. And one of the things that I have noticed is that those people, there aren't as many people who are not digitally engaged as we thought there were. We got a lot of, but what about our elderly customers who can't do this? They're all on Zoom to their grandchildren and stuff, and now they're on Zoom to us.
So I think that says something about how more than ever we need to go where our customers are, and really have frank and open conversations with them, which is a bit of a thing which actually came up in one of our early webinars in pricing, really developing that trusted relationship with people, so they will open up and they'll tell you their concerns as soon as they have them. Great, thank you. Mark, any trends that you've noticed around the customer service side of things?
Well, certainly for us, as I say, our residents are 55 and over, whether they're in care homes or in our housing schemes. So, we talked about social media. It's not so applicable to them. Digital channels per se are not so applicable to them. We don't have or didn't have even regular email communications with our residents. It was something, when I joined, it was something obviously I wanted to change and encourage. But actually this has created an opportunity. But just to step back, I think the most important thing, as it always should be, crisis, no crisis, is what are the needs of the customer? You know, what is it we need to respond to? And as Ben touched on, you know, with services reducing, being reprioritized in an organisation like ours, whether it's repairs or, you know, the lack of physical opportunities for physical meetings, whether that's like the resident assemblies that Ben also talked about, we had to quickly kind of really measure the pulse, measure the need. You know, many of our residents are vulnerable. You know, they, for example, you know, a number of them might have been shielding and might receive shielding letters. So we undertook a few initiatives, which is quite unusual for an organisation like ours, I suppose, in that we haven't done it before. So, for example, we got together a group of 40 volunteers to telephone every single resident to go through a kind of a checklist of needs, you know, things like, are you shielding? Do you have medical needs? Do you have a digital means to communicate with your relatives? A whole host of things. And also ensure that we kept regularly communicating via letter, which, you know, is so old hat, it's so counterproductive to my experience as a, you know, but that's the right channel for them. So, you know, we've sent out, I don't know, half a dozen separate letters. One of them was like a pack of 30 pages with activities they could do, puzzles and all sorts of things. You know, we really went out there to show that a connection. I mean, obviously we have frontline staff in housing that are speaking to people on a daily basis anyway, not to take away from what they do, but, you know, the sheer need for support from our residents, and fear and concern, obviously, about this virus, meant that we really had to step up. So the exercise we did with the telephone calls really informed a number of decisions that we made. So, for example, we actually did launch and have been running ever since a regular email that goes out to, we had at the start of the crisis, maybe 100 email addresses, most of which didn't work. And now we have nearly 500. And people engage. Now, I know that sounds really basic, but it shows progress from where we were, and listening to the needs of the customer. That's what it's always about in any situation, isn't it? And how you respond to it. So I think we got some wins from it, for sure. So, for example, from the original calls, we identified 100 really vulnerable residents that we needed to call every week, and have done since, and other residents where we needed support, medical needs, because they didn't have anyone else to support them. We gave away over 100 tablets for free to some residents who just weren't connected at all. So yeah, you've got to ask the question. You've got to find those ways to understand how should we be communicating going forward. And this has been a real opportunity, I suppose, for us.
That's a really interesting point, because in order to provide great customer service at the moment, as you rightly say, you really need to understand people's needs, which might mean that you need to work really quickly to gather data around those needs, and then think about how you can either set up new channels or optimize certain channels in existing. Even the humble letter, who'd have thought? But if it's the only channel that people are going to get, then obviously it's one which you have to use. Just a final question from me then, before we come on to the discussion. Richard, obviously customer service is a real differentiator, as we were saying earlier, but it can be quite a labour intensive thing to provide. Certainly Marco's described there, and also Ben shows that there's a huge amount of work that needs to go into that area. Do you have any thoughts on how organisations can best provide that customer service if they don't have a great deal of resource at their disposal?
I think it depends very much on your, excuse me, on your industry sector. Clearly for us, we're in education, and we have several customers. One set of customers is people actually learning. Another set of customers for apprentices, maybe their employer. And for people learning, I think with COVID, one of the things you need to do is say, okay, we went digital at 48 hours notice or whatever it was. And we basically did everything we were doing that was non-digital, and we did it digitally. And then the next stage is to say, well, okay, is that actually the way we were doing it offline, the best way to do it online? And the answer is probably no. So whereas people might be happy, or it might be effective to sit in a classroom all day for a whole day for a workshop or a masterclass, but doing that on video conferencing, it might be really difficult to keep people's attention for a whole day session, 7 hours or whatever it might be. So, and you say, well, should we be breaking it down? If we break it down, do we break it down into 2 half days? If we do that, are they different things apart, and do we give people projects to do between the 2 halves? And suddenly you're changing the nature of the sessions as well as just changing the timings. So that's one element of customer service from our perspective. I think a second element of customer service is employers for apprentices. And one of the issues there, or the challenges there, is that you lose the informal contact. So in the olden days of a few months ago, a coach was often in with the employer or seeing the apprentice, and no doubt they pass the employer's desk or stick a head around the door and say hi. And that's how you build relationships, and that's how you get very quick feedback on how things are going and how to improve service and so forth. When you're doing it digitally, you don't have that. You don't digitally drop in to see somebody while you're seeing somebody else informally, generally speaking. I mean, it may be true, but you can't see through their doorway whether they're available or whether they're already doing something else, or you understand. So it is a different world, and there's a different set of challenges that we have to overcome and work out how do you maintain those sorts of relationships, or for new clients build those sorts of relationships in a COVID related world. So I think that's customer service for us, and it is slightly tricky in our world because who is the customer? There are lots of definitions of customer, and they want different things, of course, and that's how we're moving forward. It's fair to say.
So that's a great point, because I think what you've shown there is, firstly, how do we set metrics for success in this brave new world that we find ourselves in? And then secondly, some of the different factors that need to be taken into account when you are trying to track that success. Because I think what you've all alluded to there brilliantly through the panel discussion has been about the importance of empathy and emotion and goodwill. And you can track some of those things. Certainly you can look at sentiment on social media. That can be a bit of a blunt instrument, but there are other areas where you might need to get feedback in different ways and really put different data sets together and look at what it tells you in the brand about how you're perceived. So some really interesting and quite challenging considerations to think through there in terms of customer service, and also how we make the most of our people. Brilliant. So lots of great ideas, lots of fantastic food for thought there. We had some fantastic questions actually put in the chat for our discussion earlier, and Stephanie, I remember, kicked us off with a really good one about referrals. Stephanie, do you want to remind us of your question, read it out so that we can put it to the panel?
Yeah, and so it was just about how to make sort of your existing customers like absolute raving fans, which will then, bring in new customers, so you can expand your business.
Brilliant. So I think this also almost speaks to the point about, can you make your customers into influencers almost, if they're going to really share what your organisation does with their network, but also just to give them a great experience that they're so excited about that they share with other people. Ben, shall we start with you on that? Because I think it speaks to some of the themes which you picked up earlier. Ben, you're on mute.
So I've got a boy in the next room arguing with Call of Duty, so I'll keep on to turn it off.
Don't worry at all. Yes, same in there.
One of the things that we did, luckily working in housing, we had key workers, and it was coincidence, but those people were getting stopped on the way to work, saying, "What are you doing out? It's lockdown." So I got them all high vis key worker jackets, and so we had caretakers on estates from 6 till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, doing very, very, very visibly being key workers, and that went down a treat. All of a sudden we had people putting up posters in their blocks saying, "Thanks so much, you guys, you're risking it all for us," and indeed they're risking just as much as anyone else. And I think we've probably seen a lot of other brands do that. You know, Uber have certainly done it with their drivers. Sainsbury's have certainly done it with their delivery people. So it's building fans. Yeah, let's make the most of the fantastic work our key workers are doing.
Excellent, thank you. So really heroing your staff there so that other people talk about the great work that they're doing.
Yeah, I've said before, I'm not sure the hero narrative works. Some of the feedback I've had from our staff certainly is that if you're a hero, it makes it very difficult to do anything if you're having a bad day, if you're down, because heroes aren't like that. So you know, very much ordinary people doing great jobs in extraordinary times, but I fall short of hero.
That's a really interesting point, because I guess the last thing any of us want to do is to make the people who work for our organisations uncomfortable. So yeah, that's a really interesting point, I think, about tone and content and how they're portrayed. Great, excellent question. I think we've got some other very good questions here. So Jamie, you had a brilliant question with lots of different elements to it. Can you read it out so we can put it to the panel?
Yeah, so I work for a housing association as well, so I can relate to a lot of stuff you're saying. And it's mainly, I mean, you've covered a lot of the stuff I asked, really, because that's kind of where the conversation went. But it's not so much staff, you know, doing their own individual narratives about what they're doing as individuals, but they kind of like different teams around the organisation are kind of pulling together their own pages for their services that they offer. So like we've got like employment and enterprise, for example, who help get people into work and offer support with CVs and stuff, etc. And they've made, I mean, work at my organisation is called Bolton at Home, and this is just a really good example because they've decided to make a page on Facebook called Bolton at Work. And it's quite off-brand, and it's not an official brand name that we have. It's not, you know, it's not a sub-brand or anything like that. It's just something they've come up with and they've created that. And it's like, I think that's just one example of how, you know, we want people to do stuff like that and show off the great work that they're doing, but we don't want them to be, you know, we don't want people to think Bolton at Work isn't part of us, because if you look at that Facebook page, it doesn't really look like it's a strand of what we're doing. It looks like something completely separate. So it's about how you know, because everyone's wanting to do their own thing on social media and support customers because they can't do it in person, and especially that team, the employment enterprise team. But it's just how do we make sure it's all, you know, part of a consistent narrative, and as a few of you have said, you know, that telling the story kind of consistently. It's how do we do that, and that's we've had to have some difficult conversations with that team actually, because we don't want them to think that we're telling them no. It's just more controlling it a bit better and maybe keeping it a bit more on brand at the least.
So how do you get your people out there on social media but make sure they're still on brand? Marco, I know you've had to do lots of work around this. What else would you add on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's one we all come across as marketeers in any industry, in any circumstance. There's always one team or one part of a business. I think it always comes down to the same thing, which is people understanding what brand is, first of all, long term or short term. Often people don't understand even what brand is. You know, the old cliche about it's a logo and a strap line or some mission statement or something. So I think, you know, there's always a starting point of which has been good for us in a way, because we've just rebranded, haven't rolled it out properly. Because COVID, but we've, you know, and we've got a new website coming, but it's given me an opportunity to talk to senior leaders at least and say, look guys, this is what branding is about. This is how it's going to work, you know, looking at our sort of core purpose, our messaging, our value proposition, you know, terms that people aren't really used to. So that's one side of it, I think, is taking the time to speak to key people in the organisation there, Jamie, to help them to understand what brand is and how it works. And then underpinning that is process. And it sounds to me like you don't have, which is quite common, but you don't have a rigid or robust process there for how things are created, a process flow. All things need to come through when they're critical things like setting up a page, for example, as an example, from scratch. They need to come through a central department. If people understand why that's necessary and how that relates to brand and ultimately to reputation, then 9 times out of 10 people buy into that, and there's no problem. I think the challenge sometimes is the lack of skill sometimes in that communication process between a marketer, and I'm not talking about you at all. I don't know you at all, Jamie, but sometimes it ends up being a junior discussion with someone who's not very good at communicating, and it becomes a little bit we want this, and a bit of a conflict rather than actually, look, this is for the good of the company and good for you. So it always boils down to understanding brand and understanding having a good process in place. I think easier said than done, I know.
So really having that.
Can I come in now?
Yeah, go for it. Go on, Ben.
Just wanted to say that I think it's something for your senior leaders to deal with, because what happens, it's always the nicer parts of the organisation that want their own identity and their own brands. It's always the community development teams, the employment teams, the sports development teams, whatever they may be, and that leaves your main brand as a rump with all the unpopular stuff, the rent arrears and the antisocial behaviour and things like that. So it's very, very dangerous, I think, to have these separate brands. And I think that if your chief executive and your leadership team want the good things, these nice things, to rub off well on the organisation, then there's got to be one brand. And I think that they need to show some leadership in that direction.
That's right. But I think I've found, certainly with this organisation, Ben, and others, is that you can't, you need to demonstrate the evidence for this. So with CNC, they had 6 brands, right? Which they, same sort of thing you're talking about. We're setting up a new division. We need a brand, rather than a name, for example. And with a rebranding, based on experience and looking at the market and looking at this organisation, I was able to present a case to EMT to say, look, this isn't the right way to go. We need to go with one brand. We're doing a rebrand. We need one, get our customers and stakeholders to understand one company. But it's got to come from you. I mean, it's got to come from a senior leader within marketing is what I'm saying. Educating EMT, getting that buy-in, because they don't necessarily get that off the bat either, certainly in my experience anyway, but you do need that buy-in. You're absolutely right, from the senior leadership, and then filter it down from there.
Getting that buy-in is really key. Richard, have you got any advice for Jamie? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I was actually unmuted and I muted myself. I'm always relatively pragmatic about this stuff. My background is marketing if you go far enough back, but in practice, I do marketing, but haven't ever actually sat in the marketing department per se. And I tend to be more interested in getting people to do stuff than worrying about the niceties of how it's branded and so forth. So I to some degree, I'm saying the opposite of the other two speakers, because I have a slightly different perspective, and I'm very task focused. And if calling themselves something else enables people to do things they wouldn't have done otherwise, then I'm all for it. Now, I understand Ben's point that if everybody who does the nice stuff and popular stuff wants to brand themselves differently, then the rump brand gets murdered. But so there is a balance to be struck. But I think pragmatism is the order of the day, generally speaking. It's what works.
Yeah, it's finding out the point at which you can give people, let them loose a bit, and the point at which they might need some extra guidance. And I suppose that's going to be different for every organisation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Great. Excellent. So lots of brilliant questions there, thank you, and lots of very good insight from our panel. Before we wrap up, I think we've got a few minutes just to reflect on what we're all going to do differently after this session. So once again, what I would like you to do is just to name one thing you're going to do differently and just pop that into the chat. So can we all pop that into the chat now? Just post that as soon as you've written it. Very good. So Stephanie, you're going to be providing some messaging to customers, thinking about empowerment within guidelines. Very good. Anything else anyone's going to do differently? Please do pop that into the chat. Oh, very interesting. A nice bit of feedback from Jamie, looking at how he can create a bit more of a process with the rest of the organisation around managing some of those digital assets reflecting different parts of the brand, and where you can, I think, give that some freedom in helping different areas of the organisation to demonstrate their own identity, but making sure that that's really consistent with the wide brand is a really interesting one. So thank you for raising that, Jamie. Excellent. So we've talked about social media, we've talked about brand, we've talked about how we can get our people out there, where you need a process, where you may not need a process, and where customer service can be a differentiator. Obviously, really interesting challenge there about how to do that on a budget. So thank you so much for all the ideas that you've shared about that. Firstly, a huge thank you to our excellent panel, Marco, Ben, Richard. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and for sharing your thoughts and your many insights. Also a big thank you to all of our delegates who've joined us today and shared some fantastic questions. We very much hope to see you next time, when we will be talking about customer experience and how we can give people really good customer experience at the moment, reflecting on what's changed over the last couple of months, but also where you go from here. So very much starting to build on some of the themes which have been drawn out today. So I'm looking forward to that. I hope you will join me there. We've been asking people in the email with the joining details to share any questions that they have, in the same way that we did with the activity at the start of the webinar. If you've got any burning questions, you are very welcome to join me actually over on and send those questions to me on zoe.amma@jja-group.co.uk. If there's any questions you'd like to feed over to the panel ahead of the webinar itself and to make sure it's reflected in the discussion. Please also do follow us on LinkedIn, because we will be sharing some additional content about the webinars themselves. We have actually written some blogs reflecting the findings from the different webinars, and also there are recordings from the webinars as well, which I think you will also get emailed to you. And in the meantime, we very much hope to see you at the next session, same time next week, when we will be talking about customer experience. And please do follow us over on JGA Group over on LinkedIn. I've just put the link in the chat there. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you again to our panel. Thank you again to our delegates. And we very much look forward to seeing you same time next Monday. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.